Hello, and welcome back to Music Therapy and Beyond. This month, for the month of March, we are celebrating music in schools and specifically talking about music therapy in schools. Last week, Elizabeth and Dr. Knight had an amazing conversation about IEP goal writing and the shift in thinking of compliance-based goals moving toward comprehension goals and how to rethink what functional goal writing looks like. Elizabeth also made the connection between goal writing and trauma-informed music therapy. This is a great segue into the conversation I will be having today with Zoe Levine, LPMT, MTBC. I will let her tell you more about who she is and the work she's doing. We talk about community music therapy principles in a school setting, what it means to recognize the intrinsic value of our students in our sessions, and some clinical applications to leveraging IEP goals to work for our students and their passions. I can't wait to bring you this conversation, so let's get to it. Well, Zoe, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you today.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited about it. Yeah, I'm really happy that you asked me to be here.
Well, I'm happy that you accepted. So, just to kind of introduce yourself to our community, why don't we start with you sharing some of your background? Like, how did you get into music therapy? What's your clinical background? Basically, how did we get here today?
Yeah, I mean, that goes pretty far back. Well, I'm Zoe. I'm Zoe Levine. I'm a music therapist and a licensed practitioner in Maryland. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I am a white enabled Jewish music therapist. I am Appalachian from West Virginia. And I know that all of those things might sound like kind of disconnected, but they're all pretty integral into like how I made my way here and like pretty much everything you're gonna kind of hear today. My family is super musical. My dad kind of came up in the DC rock scene. My mom sings all the time. So a musical family. My brother actually just passed his music therapy boards. Just got his first job. So we're like, it's a music family. And
That's
growing up
awesome.
yeah, it's really cool. Like my community growing up too, it was super musical. A really kind of special place. So it's just, I don't know, it was kind of ingrained.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, where did you do your educational work?
So I it was kind of cool. I was in West Virginia University's first graduating class of music therapists. So me and my friend Patty, who is now a board certified music therapist, still working in West Virginia. We were kind of the first ones out of that program. And now I'm back at Shenandoah getting my master's. So that's been really cool. But that's kind of my educational background. And then I went and did my internship at Annapolis Music Therapy, and I have been there ever since. So
Wow.
yeah, it's really cool. I think I'm kind of towards the in my fourth year there, end of my fourth year. So been with them for a while, and I am now living on the Eastern Shore, working on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and then also seeing some folks in Annapolis.
Very cool. Now, if you could just kind of give like a general description of the populations that you work with, the type of programs that you're doing with your current job.
Yeah, so I I personally don't usually like contextualize like the work I do in terms of populations, but I can definitely kind of give some insight into like settings and places, and kind of some of the lived experience that brings people into community with me. So I was working in the public school system for the first 3 years of my practice, which was a really kind of interesting space, all IEP based individual services with like some grant group work, some intergenerational programming in the community, kind of just random other programs, but most, like the bulk of it was in the public schools. And then just this last year, I started at a school over on the Eastern Shore, which is a really interesting place. It provides day and residential school services for disabled folks. Um, just a note, like as we go through this, I personally use identity first language versus kind of person first language. And I know it's super subjective, and I am happy to talk about people however they want to be talked about, but just as the default, that's kind of what I do. But yeah, that's where I am now. I'm at a semi-residential school over on the shore, and I still see a couple of folks individually out of Annapolis. And then the rest of my time is working with college undergrads at Shenandoah, which is really cool.
That's awesome. Wow, what a really cool conglomerate of experiences that you've got going. That's awesome. So one word that I've picked up on that you've used a couple times is community. And I know that music therapy is like hard to put into a box of like philosophy or like put a label on how we think about what we do. But if you could maybe explain your philosophy to how you practice music therapy and like what kind of is like a driving factor in how you approach your clinical work.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to our intern about this yesterday, and the fact that it's like a really hard thing to do, but really important to kind of be able to communicate and at least try to grapple with the words that reflect like what we do in practice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that a lot of my work is kind of informed by community music therapy ideals. It's also informed by kind of a critical humanist perspective. Natasha Thomas and Susan Hadley have a really awesome piece. I believe that's in Perspectives, that gives like a really cool rundown of critical humanism, and it's kind of the integration of all these different critical theories, post-humanism. But you're right, it is really hard to like wordify that, because there aren't really, I feel like people have such different understandings of what each definition is. Like if you say person-centered, people have 18 different ideas of what a person-centered music therapy session looks like.
Right.
So I think that that's really the challenge I come across, and that is like giving these words like critical humanism, like I don't know that that necessarily, I mean, it makes it a little easier to contextualize what I'm talking about, but it's, I don't know that it necessarily like says what my practice looks like, which is, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that.
It's anytime someone asks me, I have like a generic answer, but I just find myself thinking, I wish I could just show you. Like, can you just like be a fly on the wall and look at what I'm doing? Because that would speak so much more clearly about my practice than like what I could ever define to you or like use words to try to capture, because it's just so vast and beautiful. And that's one of the things that I love about what we get to do. And so, one thing that I know we had kind of touched on just in our email correspondence was how you are using your philosophy in your school setting, and especially being semi-residential. Can you share a little bit more about the work that you're doing there and kind of what your goals are with your students and how you're going about that?
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, it's a situation that a lot of music therapists who are positioned in um, kind of a similar way that I am find themselves, and that is being really philosophically kind of at odds with the places we're at, especially, you know,
Yeah.
institutions, and navigating that and what it looks like to still, you know, make meaning out of being at a place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of that is, you know, just putting it out there in the beginning that like I know that not all places are for me. I know that I am not every setting's cup of tea, and being okay with like releasing that and just owning that at the beginning. But I've also found, a lot of meaning kind of being in a space like where I am now, where I can kind of introduce uh maybe a different way of practicing and thinking and relating to people than the folks there kind of used to. And, I've actually found that people have been really receptive and interested, especially like once they see what I do, and they see, kind of the joy in our music spaces. I actually think that a lot of folks are more open to ideas than we necessarily give them credit for. And a lot of the times, I mean, there's a very traditional way that working, especially like with disabled folks, has been taught in schools. And like if that's the only thing that you've been taught, like it might feel wrong to you and you might just not know that there's like another way of working.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've had some really amazing conversations and experiences with folks there, and then also just like navigating the compromise of like, I respect that you're with these folks for, you know, all the other hours of the week, and I am with them for 30 minutes. Like, how do we mesh? How do we kind of exist in community with each other?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I got away from the question on that one, but
Well, that's
um,
okay. I mean, you can I'm thinking too like I mean, one thing that I wanted to ask was because a lot of like educational systems, especially like in special ed, are very, very behavioral based. And so, I mean, you've worked with IEPs, so you know, like a lot of them are very, and that's part of the bigger conversation that we're having this month is very compliance based goal writing, which is just um, not always the most productive and not always the most helpful for the people that are, being assigned these goals and tasks. And so, has there been any pushback or maybe like how have you handled, I guess, maybe educating those opposing maybe values in this system that you're trying to work in with these students? How have you been able to educate? I mean, you said they were a lot of the staff are really open to it, which is amazing. But I'm just wondering, like, how have you handled conversations where maybe it's been a little trickier to explain the
yeah,
value?
I think that a big part of that is like how these goals and objectives come to fruition.
Mm,
Um, that it's not me sitting in an office figuring out like, okay, here are my list of domains and objectives and all of those things that I'm going to bring into this space that I'm a new person in. Before I think that goals and objectives have to come out of a relationship. They have to come out of an understanding. I don't think that, you know, um, you can do a quick musical assessment and then come up with goals and objectives that are meaningful with no input.
mhm.
I spent a lot of time, interviewing staff, interviewing students, just hanging out in classrooms, being like, all right, what do y'all usually listen to? I mean, and what do y'all do? What are you passionate about? What what's something that you like? Is there anything that like you want to learn? Or is there anything like what is meaningful to you, and then taking that, and if you produce goals and objectives that reflect that, I think that people really kind of see more value in that. And I mean, understanding the balance of language where I do have goals and objectives that I can present to you, and they are in it's written in a way that like reflects that there's intention. Like it's not just not that there's anything wrong with going in and just like winging it, but there's intention put behind what I do.
Yeah.
Um, and it's reflective of not just like my wants, but the wants of the folks there. So it's definitely a communal coming to. And because of that, and like I'll reflect, I'll be like, when we talked about this, like I heard when you said that the folks in your classroom seem bored with X, Y, and Z. So if they're bored and you don't know what gets them going, like let's introduce leisure skills as an objective. Let's introduce finding out what the music that people are passionate about is. Like that can be an objective of this space is, you know, exploring what type of play and what type of leisure is meaningful so that people can integrate that outside of our space so that you know what kind of music your students like, so that they know what kind of music they like. So they know, it's kind of that reflecting on like, I hear what you're giving me. I am offering this lens of my understanding, and this is kind of the goal that I'm coming to. Does that make sense to you? Do you anticipate any issues with that? If you do, like, how can we talk about them now? Because I value your input.
That's
So,
really cool.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was. And I mean, this is something that's still in process, like we're revisiting them where I'm realizing that different classrooms need different things than I originally thought. Um, and where it's like a developing process instead of me just being like, here are your goals and objectives, you're welcome, I'm a music
Yeah.
therapist, I know the best. Like it's different
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting, um, because some of the experiences that I've had in the classrooms in the schools that I've worked in has been a very different process, and one that is not necessarily conducive to that collaboration. It's maybe more the teachers hand me the goals and objectives and say,
Yes.
you have to do this now. And it's like, what do I do with this?
Yeah, and I that was actually one of the things. I mean, I loved working in the school system, but just to be like completely upfront, one of the reasons I decided to move into another space was, even though it was like another kind of behavioral space that I didn't necessarily anticipate being in lockstep with the people there, I knew that at least like I would be writing my own goals and objectives versus
Mm,
in the public school system, I was given a list of like, here are your goals and objectives that you can pick from.
yeah.
It has to be one of these. And I think that there's a lot of space for, music therapists to advocate for goals and objectives that they think would be felt as more meaningful for the therapy participant.
Yeah.
But I also know that they're like, by the end of my time in the schools, my practice was a practice of stretching goals and objectives as far as they could go in, you know, yeah, we're working on, let's say, adding two-digit numbers, but like we're gonna be also including all of these other things because I know that this person also really like loves K-pop, and so it's gonna all be embedded in K-pop because that's what they're passionate about. And we're not gonna be sitting at a table, we're gonna be like putting everything on the floor and moving everything around. So it's kind of integrating that academic concept or whatever that concept is with my understanding with them of them, with what they've expressed as their desire for the space, either via, you know, spoken language, device, behavior. It's all communication.
Yeah.
And kind of having that amalgamation to kind of create a space. But it's hard sometimes. I mean, there have been, just to be honest, there have been like absolutely behavior goals where I was like, I'm gonna be honest, like I don't feel comfortable supporting that. I don't think it reflects best practice for me. Like I don't think like that's going to be a no for me. And the cool thing
Yeah.
is, after 4 years, I had a good enough relationship with most of the the teachers I worked with, that they like kind of knew they knew that that was who I was. They knew what I brought to the table, and I know what they bring to the table. And I think it's also like understanding what your boundaries are. And, you know, I think that there's this real push, and something I hear all the time is like centering the validity of music therapy, and like, oh, like that acceptance of, oh, how do you get people to accept you as like a valid related service? How do you do that? And I understand that that's important for like folks to get access. If
Yeah.
like if we have a seat at the table, more people have access to the service. But if you're constantly centering that, oh, well, I can support that behavior goal, I know I can, and because of that, they're going to see my value, and they're going to send, if that is what it's at the center of my practice, then I know that I am really moving away from my values, from my positionality, from honestly what allows me to authentically connect with the participants I work with. So it, it's just it's constantly questioning why I'm working on something. It's constantly questioning, is there a better way? And like being comfortable to sometimes say like, yeah, there's a better way. And I don't feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important component too, because I think there is, we're often kind of put in a position to just, if you want to be here, you have to accept the way that it's always been, kind of thing. And so it's like this tricky balance of, well, I need to be here to advocate for these students and to advocate for my profession, and it's a lot of pressure, but we kind of back ourselves into a corner and forget that half of the therapeutic relationship is us, and like being authentic to
Yes,
ourselves as a therapist, because if we're not authentic to practicing the way that we are, then we're not practicing the way that we were supposed to, or that we're meant to, and so we can't, like, that just is going to hinder the relationship kind of moving forward, and I think.
absolutely. I mean, it is absolutely all relationship based. And we are, there's, I think the way at least I was initially taught is that it is completely centered on the other person. It's all about the other person. And I think that you can center someone else's voice, their personhood, but also still acknowledge that like you can't take yourself out of the equation. And if it's not, if what's happening really goes against like what your values are, then like it's not going to be an authentic space. It's not going to be like, it's going to be a lot of work and probably not a lot of those joy moments. And I don't know, I don't feel like that would be sustainable for me. And I don't think that that's something that the people I work with would really get that much out of, honestly. Um, so I love that you said that, because that's huge. It's all about relationships.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So putting this idea, I guess, into practice a little bit. I mean, often in the school settings, kind of like we've touched on, there can be a lot of red tape, so to speak, right? There's a lot of documentation and things that we have to do and keep track of for their purposes and billing and all the things. So how are you, um just as like a practical tip that someone could maybe start to think about implementing in their own work, how do you write some of these goals in a way that kind of balances empowering them and also accomplishing what you need to for the technical side of documenting?
yeah, I mean, so, that's a hard question, just because so many of the requirements in different spaces
Right.
are, I mean, they vary immensely. I mean, I'm thinking about like my goals and objectives at the space I'm at now, and it's, it surrounds leisure skills, exercising autonomy, building
Mm.
community, exploring communication and preferred modalities, all of these different things. Um, and then I'm also thinking back to like just also really strategically picking goals in the public school setting where it was like, you know what, I can envision an experience that I could combine multiple layers of meaning while also, supporting this academic goal that's going to make it kind of easier for them to navigate their school life.
One thing that
So,
I'm
oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. So I was just gonna say one thing that I'm thinking about as you're talking, and I was thinking about this earlier too when you used the K-pop and like counting goal example. I think it's such an obvious but easily overlooked mindset switch from my thinking. It's so easy to get caught up in like putting the goals first, especially when they're compliance based goals and like really centering everything around the goal instead of embedding it into the music and making the music and the relationship the primary focus of every interaction. You know what I mean? Like it's so
Yeah.
obvious when you like say it back. It's like, well, yeah, I'm a music therapist, duh. But it's not always duh because of the way that the system is kind of,
It's this really
you know.
procedural way of thinking of like, okay, I see a problem, I'm bringing my music in to fix it versus a relationship based way of like, this is my understanding of like how it feels to be with this person. This is how I understand their passions, and like this is the music that's coming out of this space. Okay, I can see how I can support this, which is meaningful for them because of X, Y, and Z with that, someone who just want to like shout, if you're looking for more information on this kind of like reflection of like work reflecting understanding of people, Carrie Devlin, who is just an absolutely brilliant writer. Her Instagram too is just like a wealth of information. It's liberated learning. But I mean, she taught me so much about this, and it's like I'm thinking about, just yesterday when I was in sessions, oh my goodness, how many different, like we had Eminem, TLC, Professor Longhair, Coldplay, Barney, Santana, like all of these all of these different artists, and pretty much every session was informed by like what I know people want to explore. And I'm personally feeling that there's a lot of meaning coming from it, and I've heard from students and staff that they feel like there is too, because it's really like taking that time, even just at the beginning of the session. Like a lot of the times I'll bring in some options for experiences, and like I have all of these different materials with me and I have my space set up. So it's like, if someone picks XYZ, I can pull things out and I can look things up easily. But I have like a ton of different cards that just say like dance, listen to music, use a parachute, play the drums, do electronic music and beat building, like all of these different things. And at the beginning of most of my sessions, I'm like, all right, what are we going to do today? What do you want to do? Do you want to write a song? And like people will just go up and we'll build a session plan together and collaborate in that. And when we get each thing, I'm like, all right, so if we're going to do a parachute experience, like what are we going to listen to? Who has ideas? Um, what do you all know? Like, what's something that's going on? Oh, Mardi Gras is going on. You all have been talking about that in class. That's really cool. Like, what is the music of Mardi Gras? Let's look up a YouTube video and we'll do the experience with that. I think personally, like feeling comfortable with using recorded music, using pop music, using apps, using all of these different things that make a wealth of different sounds available to you in a space, but also like make that reflexive kind of improvisational space, a little more accessible. Um, that's been huge for being able to react and incorporate what is relevant in someone's life in that day, instead of, coming in with a tailored session plan of like, okay, we're going to do rhythm sticks first, and it's going to be to me playing a live version of Taylor Swift because like this is what I've prepared. It's like, okay, yeah, sometimes I do like prepare a live version of 22, but I'm also going to have the freedom to be like, oh, that's not what we're driving with today. Like, sure, let's listen to, I don't know, Dan Zane's, something else. There, it's kind of building that space with the folks we're working with.
Absolutely. And this is kind of, in my mind, a good segue too into just touching on a little bit of what I believe is the importance of being trauma informed when we're in these spaces with the people, all the people that we're working with. That includes staff and teachers and
Yes.
any participant in our space. But I think your responsiveness to your students blends beautifully with that. And that's something that I am similarly passionate about, is being able to be flexible, and whatever they're showing me that they need or they're telling me that they need, that's what we're going to address first. Before any goal, it's the sensory, it's their emotional, all those other things that make them who they are, and trying to help them meet those needs together. So I guess kind of my question is, how does maybe trauma informed, or thinking about um their, all of their lived experiences and what you maybe know about or don't know about, how does that play into your sessions and your interactions with them?
Absolutely. I mean, there is so much that people, especially like I work in a lot of group settings. I mean, I do see people individually, but I do a lot of groups, and mm, do I know everything that a person has experienced? Absolutely not. Um, so you're right that like reflexive piece does go into it, but it's also really doing doing the work beforehand, like listening to first person, perspectives of, autistic advocates, talking about, what their experience of trauma in school settings has been like. What does that experience like for them, and really like reflecting on and appreciating their contributions to the knowledge base, and sitting with that ahead of time so that like we are centering critical theories that do reflect lived experience of trauma, especially in the school settings. I mean, I work with a lot of Black students, a lot of students of color, and understanding what role kind of behaviorism might play in their life when they're going out into, you know, society, and the dangers that they face that are probably different than like our white students. It's having that perspective and taking the space and really reading and learning and committing to create time and to really sit with perspectives that are outside of your own, um, in advance, because it does come into therapy spaces. There isn't like a neutral therapy space that is all sunshine and rainbows and light. Like that's just not people bring their whole selves in. You bring your whole self in, and if you're not rooted in that, then like we talk all the time about like potential for harm, and
Mm,
you know, I think that that is one of the most relevant examples of potential for harm is, are we enforcing, just as an example, like arbitrary social construct that is completely culturally irrelevant to someone, and thus re-traumatizing their experience of like having like a really traumatizing experience of acculturation. Like what and how do we not just be reflexive to that, but how do we proactively learn so we are not, I mean, honestly, like there's no way to like never cause harm, but to do your best to be informed, to do your best to, work in opposition to that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think something that I've been reflecting on a lot too is especially in school settings, there's there's a lot of ableism that has been built into a lot about how we think about that's built into the goal writing is just very
Society is built on that. Like it's in our school systems are a reflection of our society, which, really puts an emphasis on productivity. It's like your value is linked to like, can you produce? Can you create a product? Can you feed like capitalist systems? And thus all of the goals for our students reflect like getting them to a point where they can produce. And
yeah,
if that's not like people have innate value and have so much to bring to the world without that like if you negate that and you're only centering that ability to produce, that ability to sort colors so that you can get a job one day, then like it is absolutely ableist. It's ableist. It's honestly like it's just wrong. And I mean, it's hard. I definitely hear that like when you're in a classroom where that's like what you're hearing all the time, like it sometimes feels like it's so pervasive, like how can there be change? But I think that that's part of our work is to find those opportunities for shifting.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so how might a music therapist, regardless of their um, maybe experience or the kind of work that they're doing in a school setting in particular, how might a music therapist listening to this episode go about incorporating some of the ideas that you're operating with in their practice?
Absolutely. I would probably say like lean into like there are ways to lean into an IEP to the student's advantage. Like there are sections of an IEP and understanding how they function, like knowing the supplementary aids, the modifications, the supports that student is by law required to have access to, that is so important. So like let's say there are frequent movement breaks built into the supplementary aids, and you see folks who are constantly trying to get this person to sit down and quote unquote attend to a task
All the
like
time. I see it all
all
the
the
time.
time. Yeah, exactly. Like that is such a classic moment.
Yeah.
Just having that, like really centering that, when I'm writing this goal, I'm going to put in my the mediating conditions, like given access to continuous movement opportunities. Like we are centering that kind of traditional format of like mediating conditions and then the objectives and then the frequency, but like the mediating conditions aren't, given two prompts. It's given what this person actually needs, that we see that what they need, like given access to movement, given access to whatever type of sensory experiences that they need, given access to repetition and interest-based experiences, given access to the things that we actually know work for this person, and then move into like, what is the stuff that, they're they're probably actually doing. So just really understanding the IEP and understanding that like it can have some really harmful aspects, but it is also, a real opportunity to say like, hey, this is something that like the school system came up with. Like this is a structure that like you obviously value. So why are we like, this should be available to this person all the time, every day. It's not just in the music therapy space. Like, do they have access to this in PE? Do they have access to this in language arts? Do they have like understanding and leaning into the parts of the IEP that do feel meaningful for the student?
And maybe too, I'm thinking even maybe redefining, like, if the goal is student will attend to a task, what are all the things that that task can be, and what does it mean to attend to it? Does it have to be sitting at a desk? Can it be walking around the room? Can it be bouncing on a therapy ball? Like, what are all of the different ways that you can show attention in a way that is helpful and truly individualized to that student, their capabilities and their ability to succeed
And like,
with what they already have?
yeah, and what does success look like to that person? Is it, if like, is the task like, delivering papers to every single room in a building without, engaging in XYZ behavior? Or is it like, I know this person is absolutely passionate about their dog, like they are so into their dog, like is what a more meaningful task? Like, can we do all the steps to like feed your dog? Like, is that,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so is that meaningful to you? Like, do you want to feed your dog by yourself? Like, that's kind of cool.
And
I
that's
mean,
like an actual ADL, like that's a life skill, but it's also empowering to them because it's something that they love and they're passionate about. And so giving them the tools to like do what they love is amazing.
people have intrinsic power, they have intrinsic worth, and, autonomy is a right. It is, I mean, even for children, even for like the young children we work with in school settings, like it's a safety skill. Like at the very, if you can't appreciate it for any other reason, it is a safety skill
Yeah.
of being able to reject, of being able to say no. I mean, it's so much more than that, but I feel like that's a very palatable kind of um, justification. So how do you embed that? How do you look for ways that you can shift your practice, shift your space, shift the physical environment, instead of trying to change another person who comes to therapy as a whole person, who comes as unbroken as just a person who's ready to explore and potentially, grow, potentially stay the same for a while, potentially, like all of those different things are fine, but like how how do you shift yourself, your practice, and your space to be affirming to their personhood?
Yeah. I think in light of whether they are meeting their IEP goals or not, it's not a matter of they're good because they met their goal today and they were able to sit still, or they're bad because they can't sit still. There's very like harsh contrasting sometimes language but also attitude around whether they're succeeding or not, whatever that means, and so I think absolutely having a posture of recognizing and just giving them a safe place to just be who they are in spite of goals or objectives or all those things. And then in that way, empowering them to grow or to just be. That's okay. Like you
Yeah,
said, I
sometimes
think
there
that's
is
so great.
directionality that comes out of it. Sometimes there really
Yeah.
is that direction of like, I want to learn how to, thinking of an adapted lesson, like I want to learn how to play this song on piano. Like I want to do that. And there's going to be structure that comes out of that. There's going to be directionality. And then sometimes there's less of that. And all of those things are, you're right, it's important. And um someone's availability for learning, someone's availability for expressing their knowledge is not does not equate, like it's not the same thing as whether someone's learning. It's not the same thing as whether someone is finding meaning from an experience, which you know it's so easy to conflate that. And they just uh, availability for expression and availability for learning in the way that we might expect is just not the same thing as the learning we do as while we move through life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good. So, could you, and you've given a lot of great examples, but I kind of want, as we start to wrap up, I kind of want to leave our listeners with maybe some inspiration on how to kind of get at what you are doing, the work that you're doing. So, if possible, could you maybe give an example of maybe an intervention or an experience or how you might work on one of your goals?
I absolutely can. I do want to like preface that with, I mean, it's not the way that I value this work. It's not necessarily a procedural moment where it's not like a specific experience. And it's almost definitely not an intervention, but it's like there is base work that like has to be done. It's not just a way of shifting one thing. That's a great start, but like it is centering the voices of the folks that you're working with. It's centering their experience, it's
Mm.
learning, it's committing to that. And then with that said, like I do think the whole, you know, um having I'm trying to think of like a specific example of just as expansive of a way of experiencing something as possible, like just integrating as many choices into an
Mm.
experience. If you haven't read up on or like looked at any of the amazing resources that are out there for AAC, where you're integrating, visual supports for things. You have an app on your iPad if the person doesn't have access to their own yet. Um, where you have picture choices and you have like you're accepting gestures, all of these different things. If you can combine that into one experience, like I'm thinking of a person I worked with via telehealth, which is really fun. And for every question they answered, we were doing an experience about, I think we were learning about trumpets, but also like working on vocab words. So we were like writing story songs about trumpets. Um,
That's awesome.
it was really fun. And for every experience, we would have a jam board up that had, it was like a communication board that had frequently used words on it. But then we would also use the chat and I'd be like, hey, type an H if you want a hint, or you can type out your answer, or you can speak it to me. Like, and it was all of those things. And I would have the list and I would resend it every single time of like, okay, you can type it, you can click it, you can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, you can shake your head. Like these are all of your ways that you can engage in this. And so there was that, I mean, like, there was always that opt out of like, do you even want to participate in this experience? And if the answer is no, we do something else. That's like the absolute most basic moment of like,
yeah, here's your choice.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Yeah.
Do you want to do this? And I think that, you know, people get so hung up on like, oh, people don't want to do what I'm putting out there. And like, that's okay. Like, what are people going to get from something that they like genuinely don't want to do? Like, isn't that, people kind of like downplay the fun aspect and they trivialize the fun and the play aspect of music therapy, but like, a lot of it is fun. So like just checking in, like, do you want to do this? And then having the multimodal options of like using a Jamboard that has all of these different words that have picture supports with the words, and then using the chat, and then using voice, and using all of these different things to then create this amazing musical story about this person who plays a trumpet.
Yeah.
That's just like one real life experience of, you know, affirming that all ways of communication are good. Ways of communication that I'm not even picking up on and that I might read as disengaged, still great. You know?
Yeah. My
ability to understand your communication does not mean that your communication is more or less important.
It's still valid.
Exactly. It's still valid. It's just on me whether like I can figure out, you know, and obviously like the goal is eventually to get people connected with a form of communication that is both comfortable and feels really good and is also, you know, accessible by everyone around them so that they can get their needs met. They can express what they want to express whenever they want.
Yeah.
But it's a process to get to that point.
That's a great way to think about it and to phrase it too. I like how you said that. That's really good. Well, thank you for sharing that inspiration. And I think what you're getting at with the autonomy piece is something that's totally integratable into every interaction, and something that is sometimes kind of lost in the...
It's lost in the sauce.
It is. It's lost in the sauce. But yeah, I think that's a great thing to end on and a great way to end. So thank you, Zoe, so much for sharing you and your thoughts and how you do music therapy and how you interact with your people. I just think it's so cool, and I love the work that you're doing. So thank you.
It was really cool to connect with you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much to, you know, the therapy participants I work with who teach me all the time. All of my mentors and teachers. Cause I mean, I'm regurgitating other people's stuff, you know,
aren't we all?
Everything from somewhere. Exactly. It's all, and part of, you know, moving
just
through
learning.
Academia and life is just like connecting all the pieces and being like, hey, this is where I got this from. So thank you to them.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation with Zoe. I hope you were able to take away some inspirational nuggets of experience and wisdom, and just listening to all different perspectives and thoughts about something that many of us share in common in these educational settings. Next week, Elizabeth is going to be bringing us a mindfulness listening experience that you won't want to miss. We'll see you next time. For show notes and resources in today's episode and all episodes, head to our website, musictherapyandbeyond.com. Reach out to us at musictherapyandbeyond@gmail.com and follow us on social media to stay up to date on all the content and announcements. We'll see you next time.